What's up, guys? Welcome back to Everyday Money. Today we're going to be talking about something that you may have heard of, student loan forgiveness, and if that is a good idea or a bad idea, and really my thoughts on it, and a compromise that I think a lot of folks may be able to make with this. But if this is your first time here, be sure to hit the subscribe button to grow your wealth, increase your success, put you on the road to financial freedom, and also smash that like button for me so it helps this video out in the YouTube algorithm. So student loan debt forgiveness, it's been a pretty hot topic in political circles, just among folks, and I can see why that people are talking about this quite a bit. The idea of a college degree being the end-all be-all was sold to a lot of people very hard, especially people in my generation that graduated in the early 2000s. It was said that, that was the only path for you to have a successful life, for you to be financially successful, for you to be secure. And so folks took on a lot of student loan debt to get degrees in various programs in various fields, not all of which paid as well as the other fields in their jobs once they got out into the workforce. And so now they have all of this student loan debt, which is about 1.6, 1.7 trillion right now at the end of 2020. And it's crushing people's dreams right now. They can't afford to buy a house. They can't afford to buy a new car or start a family or whatever, because this student loan debt and the payments that they have to make on it is, crushing them, and they can't get the jobs that were promised by, the previous generation of folks that said you had to get a degree to make it in this world. What's even worse is that the income is not even outpacing the trade folks, the folks that, come in and work on your electric while you're sitting at your desk. They are oftentimes making more money than you are. And granted, a lot of times they have to work outside and in not as good of climate controlled conditions, and the work is harder, but nonetheless they are making more money. Now, the biggest thing that I have to say about this student loan debt is that when you are thinking about taking on student loans, you are at the end of your high school career. So you're talking about, when you're 16, 17, 18 years old. And for the most part, the education system in the United States really didn't teach you a thing about debt, budgets, loans, interest rates, nothing for the most part, unless you sought those classes out. And typically those were the classes that were not pushed very hard. Those would be like your home economics classes or your business math classes. And instead of that, what was pushed was high-end geometry, calculus, physics, things that would be really good to know if you were going into those fields, but is essentially worthless for probably 80 to 90% of the population. You can't even buy a beer or get a pack of cigarettes in the United States until you are 21, but they do want you to take on these massive loans to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars without having very much background or really anything to compare it to at all. And especially when everyone is pushing degree, college, etc., it makes it really hard not to do that. For example, when I was graduating high school in 2002, I went to my counselor, my guidance counselor, and they were like, "Where do you want to go to college?" And I said, I'm not going to college. I don't see the value in it. I just don't want to. I said I might join the military, I might do a trade, and you would have thought that I had come in there with like a hacksaw or something, because the look on their faces was like, because I went to a school where 99% of the people graduated and then went straight off to college. And they basically, said, you're going to be a failure, you're not going to be financially secure, etc., if you don't go get that college degree. And that's what was promised: success, money, security with that degree. And for a lot of folks, that just didn't happen, and that debt that they're saddled with has actually been the opposite of all that. They are now financially insecure, they don't have any money, they don't feel successful, and they're hanging on the edge. So we really have to run this back to the source, why we even started having student loans in the first place. And it comes down to The space race. Back in the 50s, the Soviet Union was straight wiping the floor with the United States in the space race. They launched the first satellite. They put the first person into space. They did the first spacewalk. They landed the first object on the moon in the form of a probe. They sent back the first pictures of the moon from space. I mean, they were killing us. And so the United States government started the National Defense Education Act. That allowed for student loans for folks to take, for the most part, STEM degrees, the science degrees, the engineering degrees, so that we would have more folks that were educated and could be put to work building technology for us to compete with the Russians in the space race. That went on for a few years and was extended more broadly to more fields in the Higher Education Act of 1965. And so you started getting more people taking on student loans for just, like business degrees or whatever kind of degrees that didn't necessarily have any science, technology, whatever, with that. And that ran along for about 10 or 15 years until right around 1980. And I think that this is when college really started being pushed extremely hard to everyone. That is when the cost of education increased dramatically, and it really started to outpace inflation in a large way. Essentially from 1980, the cost of education has just went straight up. And now there's probably several reasons for that. One of the biggest is likely just supply and demand. The demand went up dramatically. You only had a fixed amount of schools, and when everyone starts going to college after high school, there's only a certain amount of capacity for that. And they were saying that, if you don't go to college, and this was, through the 90s, through the early 2000s, if you don't go to college, you'll be a failure. That was essentially what was told to me my entire time that I was in school from, sometime in the 90s to the early 2000s, that you'll be a failure. In addition to the demand, colleges and universities went from what I like to just think of as educational facilities to more like resorts. And we have a college locally to where I live, so I've been able to see this over the years, and it has went from essentially a bare bones educational facility to having gyms and medical facilities, and just the actual buildings themselves are much nicer. And I understand that they have to compete against these other universities, but all that construction and all that nice stuff increases the cost of the school and going to the school. And then what we ended up with was, after everyone had been told to go to college and everyone went to college, we have now a market saturation of degrees. And so your 4-year degree is not worth what a 4-year degree was worth in the 1970s or the 1980s. For example, I just saw a job posting where they were looking for someone to service fire hydrants. When what this means is you literally take the caps off, spray lubrication on them, open up the stem of the hydrant, and just flush out rusty water, and then reassemble the whole thing. There was no flow calculations. It was not anything that required anything more than just some very simple manual labor. And in the description, it said college degree preferred. And it just blew my mind that was even in the description. So that is how saturated that the market has become for your just typical 4-year degree. And what I think was the biggest inflator of the cost of post-secondary education is the guaranteed federal loan. Pretty much every time that you put guaranteed easy money onto any type of product or asset or whatever, it inflates the cost. For example, the housing market. Low rates definitely inflate the cost of housing. Low rates inflate the cost of new cars because you can afford more if you can get finance for more. And in this case, with college loans, the rates aren't even that low, but it is guaranteed financing. You can get this money. And so colleges know that they can charge X amount of money because it is guaranteed that these kids and their parents can get these loans. And they've done some studies and they've said, no, that's not the case. That, the easy credit is not the reason that this is going up in price. But that is the only time I've ever heard that said, is for this. Every other thing that I've ever heard of, when there's easy credit involved, it inflates the price. Not only are kids being stuck with these student loans, parents can take Parent Plus loans. And there is a limit to what a student can take on as far as loans, but parents are allowed to essentially borrow an unlimited amount of money for their kids to go to college. And it can be for anything up to the total cost of tuition and room and board and meals and the whole deal. And what that does is it just inflates the price even more, because these universities know that there is money out there, and that, college has been sold as this end-all be-all for income and security that it really hasn't turned out to be. And so they will increase their costs, and they know that the parents will cover it. So you've got all these folks out there who are struggling because they're stuck under this student loan debt that was pitched to them under false pretenses. The situation may have worked out in the 70s and 80s when there wasn't a market saturation of 4-year degrees, that you got more money and more security and whatever, but it did not end up being the case for the folks that graduated high school in the 90s and the 2000s. So you've got these people that are just straddled with this debt and can't get out from under it for whatever reason. So should we forgive these loans? And the answer that I have for that is maybe. But there has to be fixes in the system, or else we will just end up in the same situation, 5, 10, 20 years from now, but probably either a lot quicker than we got to this point in the first place, or for a lot more money over the same amount of time. Because if we leave this easy credit, these federal guaranteed loans, the price of going to college is not going to go down. It will stay with at least the same, and will most likely continue to go up at the same pace that it's going up right now. It may even go up even faster, because they know that people don't have the debt anymore, and they'd probably be more willing to take on debt to go to college. And I think that these federal guarantees for these loans are a problem. If we were to remove the federal guarantees for college, they would have to decrease the cost of college. Now, how that is done is up to them, but they will continue to exist. Maybe the facilities wouldn't be as nice. Maybe they would do more remote learning, like distance learning type of stuff online. I'm not exactly sure how it is, but it cannot continue to go on where college for a 4-year degree to get a job that makes $30,000 to $50,000 costs $30,000 to $100,000. I mean, that just can't continue, and people can't continue to finance that. If it's a problem now, it will continue to be a problem in the future unless we change something, versus simply just relieving everyone from their debt. So the bottom line is, for me, I think that if we want to forgive student loans in any capacity, that we need to do a serious reform of the student loan banking industry, and it has to change, and there has to be less money available to pay these colleges. And now, for the folks that are out there that are going to say, well, what about the cost? Like, we just can't be doing this. These people took an obligation, and they should pay it. And I agree with that aspect. I think that people that take on debts should have to pay them back in general. Except in this case, this was something that was pushed on kids that are 18 years old, that have no idea about the world, were taught nothing about finance for the most part in school. They really don't know what their income is going to look like for their jobs. They were just told, go to college or you'll be a failure. And so that's what they did. I think that was a bit disingenuous. So what about the cost to the federal government and to the taxpayer? That's, you and me. We're going to be the ones on the foot to foot the bill for this. Right now, it's like a one-time cost of $1.6 to $1.7 trillion with a T. But if you think about it, if we can reform the system and only do this one time, that's not that bad. Like, we've spent money on dumber things. I mean, we just pushed through, and I'm not saying this was a dumb thing, but the CARES Act, $2.2 trillion, was just like done. Did anyone notice any difference with that? No. And I'm going to tell you why government debt on a one-time basis really doesn't make any difference. The key to this is inflation and the fact that the government is immortal. It doesn't have a time frame. You're not trying to pay off debt in 70 to 90 years like a person. Government can exist indefinitely. Inflation can make that debt worthless. So that 1.6 or 1.7 trillion dollars that we would have to take on in order to forgive all of this student loan debt would be almost completely worthless in about 30 years at the average rate of inflation of about 3.25%. You know, even if it went down to 2% inflation, that's 50 years. Again, in the course of government, that's almost nothing. In addition to that, the government's rate that they're paying on debt right now is extremely low. Just like everyone, like your mortgage rate is low right now, you know, rates are in general are low, and they could take on this debt at an extremely low rate. And so as long as they can make the debt payments, which I'm sure they can, it could be feasible for us to add this $1.6, $1.7 trillion to the national debt and finance it, and it would become, like I said, essentially worthless in about 30 to 50 years. For me, and I think for a lot of folks out there, there would have to be some very significant reforms in the lending system, as I've already mentioned. Now, if you've made it this far in the video, let's talk about what happens if nothing happens. If this all goes by the wayside, what you can do if you have student loans and you need to try to get out from underneath that debt. The average debt is about $37,000 per student. And I know that a lot of you have a lot more debt than that, and some of you have less debt than that. But for the average person, it's $37,000, which is about the average amount of a new car in the United States. So all I can say is that if you have that debt, because I have had debts, I've had debts on cars, you know, to the tune of $20,000 or more. I've had debt on houses and things of that nature. And you just have to make it a priority to pay that debt off. You know, you have to just sink as much money into that if you want to get out from underneath that debt obligation. For those of you that have gotten this far and you're in your teens or your 20s and you're thinking about going to school and you're thinking about what you want to do with your life, be sure that you look at whatever degree program that you're going into. If you're going to take on debt for that, and I urge you guys to try not to take on debt for that. Try to work like a part-time job or something to get that money. But if you are going to take on debt, be sure that that job that you can get with that degree pays at least enough to pay for that debt and live your life. And if you are just like, you know, I don't know what I want to do, look for degrees in what I call trade degrees. These are ones where they send you to school essentially to do a job. It's almost like a trade school. It's almost like HVAC or electrician or plumbing school, but it's they call these guys doctors, lawyers, engineers, things of that nature, where you're sent to school to essentially learn a high skill trade that pays extremely well. And a lot of times you have to take on a lot of debt for that, but the income that you get from it is, you know, worth the squeeze. Guys, that's my 2 cents on student loan forgiveness. I know it's a bit of a controversial subject. It's definitely a political subject, and I've tried to keep all the politics out of it. I think that that's a decent compromise in general. Thanks for watching today, guys. If this is your first time to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Be sure to hit the like button for me. I appreciate you all watching, and I'll see you next time.